The first thing my father saw when I walked through his front door was the blood on my sleeve. Not the flag stitched over my heart, not the bruises climbing up my neck, not the fact that I had not slept in almost 48 hours after pulling civilians out of a collapsing extraction zone halfway across the world. He looked at my uniform the way someone looks at a stain on white carpet. And then, in front of 30 guests holding crystal wine glasses beneath the warm glow of his birthday chandelier, my father said the words that finally broke something inside me. "Look at yourself, Evelyn. You're an embarrassment." The room went silent so fast I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I remember the smell first: rosemary roast beef, expensive cigars drifting in from the patio, my sister's vanilla perfume, and underneath all of it still clinging to me no matter how hard I scrubbed my hands in the gas station bathroom an hour earlier, the sharp metallic scent of helicopter smoke and dried blood. Nobody at that party knew where I had been. Nobody knew that 20 hours earlier I was kneeling in desert sand, trying to stop a 19-year-old medic from bleeding out through both lungs while bullets cracked over our heads. Nobody knew I had carried a little girl through fire. Nobody knew I could still hear her screaming every time I blinked. But my father looked at me standing there in that doorway, and all he saw was shame. I should have turned around and left. God knows I wanted to. But after everything that happened overseas, after 48 straight hours of adrenaline and death and fear, some stupid little part of me still wanted what I had wanted since I was 12 years old. I wanted my father to look at me like I mattered. Rainwater dripped from the edge of my coat onto the polished hardwood floor. My overnight bag hung from my shoulder so heavily it felt filled with concrete instead of clothes. My left arm throbbed beneath the temporary field dressing hidden under my sleeve, and exhaustion sat behind my eyes like hot iron. The party had already started by the time I arrived at my father's house in Alexandria, Virginia, his 71st birthday. My sister Amanda had texted me 3 times that morning, reminding me not to miss it for once. I almost didn't come. Our transport landed at Andrews less than 2 hours earlier. I could have gone straight back to Fort Belvoir, showered, slept for a week, ignored the family disappointment waiting for me across the Potomac. Instead, I drove through pouring rain because some part of me still believed maybe tonight would be different. Maybe age had softened him. Maybe surviving another mission had made me sentimental. Or maybe I was just tired enough to forget who my father really was. Charles Carter stood beside the dining room table in a navy blazer with a silver pocket square, a crystal tumbler balanced in one hand. Even at 71, he carried himself like the CEO he used to be. Perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect smile for everyone except me. His eyes traveled slowly over my dirt-streaked combat uniform. "You couldn't even bother changing first?" he asked. A few guests shifted awkwardly. I swallowed hard. I came straight from base. "Clearly." Amanda rushed toward me before the silence got worse. "Evie, hey." Her smile trembled as she hugged me carefully. "You made it." "Barely," I said softly. She pulled back and lowered her voice. "Dad's been drinking." "That's not new." Across the room, my older brother Daniel pretended to study his bourbon instead of looking at me. That was Daniel's specialty, avoiding discomfort. He wore a charcoal suit worth more than my monthly mortgage payment, and had the polished confidence of a corporate attorney who had never failed at anything in his life. My father lifted his glass toward me slightly. "You look like you slept in a ditch." A few nervous laughs flickered around the room. I felt heat creep into my face. "I've been working," I said. Doing what exactly one of his golf buddies asked casually. "Still doing all that tactical stuff." "Still doing all that tactical stuff." Like I spent my weekends volunteering at a paintball field. I forced a polite smile. Something like that. My father exhaled sharply through his nose. "Honestly, Evelyn, you're 40 years old. Most women your age have families, stability, a normal life." I stared at him. Under the table, my fingers curled against my palm so tightly my nails cut skin. Normal life? I thought about Marcus dying in the sand 2 nights earlier. I thought about the little boy who clung to my vest crying for his mother while smoke rolled through the compound. I thought about the terrified aid workers we dragged onto the helicopter while mortar fire shook the ground beneath us. Normal life. "Dad," Amanda whispered carefully, "maybe let her sit down first." "No, no," he waved a dismissive hand. "I'm serious. Look at her. covered in filth at a family event. His eyes narrowed slightly. And is that blood? The room froze again. I glanced down instinctively at the dark stain near my cuff. It's not mine, I said quietly. God, I should never have said that. Several people visibly stiffened. One woman set her wineglass down too fast. My father looked disgusted. Jesus Christ. It's handled. You walk into my house looking like this and expect people not to react. Something inside me started shutting down emotionally the same way it always had around him. A cold compartmentalization I learned as a child. Don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction. Stay composed. Funny thing was that training probably made me a better officer. I wasn't trying to make a scene, I said. Well, you succeeded. I looked around the room. Nobody met my eyes except Amanda. Even Daniel stayed silent. That hurt more than I expected. My father took another sip of bourbon. You know what your problem is, Evelyn. You mistake recklessness for purpose. My jaw tightened. You disappear for months, come back looking half dead, and somehow expect admiration for it. Admiration. I almost laughed. I had not slept in 2 days. My shoulder burned where shrapnel tore through muscle. My head still rang from helicopter rotors and gunfire, and somehow standing in my father's dining room hurt worse than any of it. Because enemy fire never pretended to love you first. I didn't ask for admiration, I said softly. No, he replied coldly, but you clearly want attention. That one landed. Not because it was true. Because a part of me had spent my entire life terrified it might be. Silence spread across the room again. Rain hammered softly against the windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, ice clinked in a glass. Then my father sighed dramatically and straightened his jacket. At least go clean yourself up before dinner. You're upsetting people. Upsetting people. I nodded once. Not because I agreed. Because I suddenly realized I was too tired to fight him anymore. I turned toward the hallway. And that was when my phone vibrated inside my pocket. One vibration. Then another. Restricted number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in my gut tightened immediately. I stepped away from the dining room noise and answered quietly, Major Carter. The voice on the other end was calm official, unmistakably Washington. Major Evelyn Carter, this is General Raymond Holloway. The Joint Chiefs need you in D.C. immediately. I stopped breathing for a second. Behind me, I could still hear glasses clinking in my father's dining room. Still hear low conversations. Still hear the humiliation hanging in the air like smoke. Then General Holloway spoke again. And Major. Yes, sir. What your team accomplished over there? The entire country's about to hear about it. I stood alone in my father's upstairs hallway for nearly 10 seconds after the call ended, staring at the rain sliding down the dark window beside me. The house sounded distant now. Muffled laughter downstairs, silverware clinking against china. Amanda trying too hard to keep conversation alive after the damage had already been done. My hand still gripped the phone tightly enough to ache. The Joint Chiefs. Even after 16 years in uniform, those words still carried weight that settled deep in your chest. Not fear exactly. Something heavier. Responsibility. I slowly slipped the phone back into my pocket and leaned my head against the wall for one brief second. The exhaustion hit me all at once then. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a deep physical collapse hiding beneath discipline and adrenaline. My body was done. But soldiers learn how to keep moving long after the body starts begging to stop. That was the problem with military training. Eventually, you stop listening to pain altogether. Downstairs, my father's voice floated upward through the stairwell. Daniel, tell them about the merger. Of course. Daniel always had stories my father loved. Big clients, bigger salaries, New York partners who respected him, conversations full of polished success that sounded impressive over bourbon. I closed my eyes briefly. When we were kids, Daniel once broke his arm falling from a tree in our backyard. I had been the one who climbed up after him because he was too scared to come down alone. I still remembered carrying half his weight across the lawn while he cried into my shoulder. Dad told that story for years, but never as proof I was brave. Only as proof Daniel had survived. That was our family in a sentence. I pushed myself off the wall and walked toward the guest bathroom. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked older than 40. There was soot along my jawline I had missed earlier, a cut near my hairline, purple exhaustion beneath my eyes. My brown hair had escaped its regulation bun hours ago and now hung in damp strands around my face. For a second I saw my mother instead of myself. Same eyes. Same stubborn mouth. She used to stand behind me in this very bathroom before school dances, pinning curls into my hair, while Dad complained downstairs that I took too long getting ready. "You don't have to shrink yourself to make other people comfortable," she once whispered to me while adjusting my necklace in the mirror. I think about that sentence more now that she's gone, especially around my father. I carefully rolled my sleeve higher and peeled back the temporary dressing on my shoulder. The wound looked ugly, but manageable. Purple bruising spread across my collarbone where the impact had thrown me sideways against the helicopter frame. The medic at Andrews told me I needed stitches properly redone within 12 hours. I hadn't even noticed the pain during the party downstairs. Funny how emotional wounds can silence physical ones. I cleaned the dried blood from my arm as best I could using a wet cloth. Pink water spiraled slowly down the sink drain. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Amanda leaned quietly against the bathroom door frame. "You okay?" I almost said yes automatically. Military reflex. Instead, I gave a small shrug. He shouldn't have said that. "No," I replied softly, "he shouldn't have." Amanda folded her arms tightly. At 42, she still carried that same nervous energy she had as a teenager trying to keep peace in the house after our parents fought. "He's worried about you," she said carefully. I actually laughed at that. A tired, humorless sound. "No, he's embarrassed by me." "That's not true." "Amanda." I turned toward her. He looked at me tonight like I was something he needed hidden before guests arrived. She looked down immediately because she knew I was right. That was the worst part. Nobody defended me because nobody was surprised. After a long silence, she stepped closer. "What happened to your shoulder?" "Training accident." "You're a terrible liar." I smiled faintly despite myself. Amanda had always been the gentlest person in the family. The kind of woman who remembered birthdays, mailed handwritten Christmas cards, cried during dog food commercials. She became a pediatric surgeon because she genuinely could not tolerate watching people hurt. Sometimes I wondered how we came from the same father. "You know he watches the news every time there's military action overseas," she said quietly. "Every single night." "That doesn't mean anything." "It means he's scared." I stared at her. "No," I said again, "it means he's ashamed." Before she could answer, voices rose downstairs again. One of Dad's friends laughed loudly. Amanda sighed. "Please just survive dinner." I almost told her I had survived worse than dinner. But honestly, at that moment I wasn't completely sure. She left and I stayed behind another minute staring at myself in the mirror. The strange thing about rejection from a parent is that it never really gets easier. It doesn't matter how old you become. Some wounded little part of you still hopes next time will be different. Even after wars. Even after medals. Even after saving lives. You still walk into their house hoping to finally be enough. I headed downstairs again because leaving now would create a bigger scene, and God forbid I ruin my father's perfect evening. The dining room glowed warm and gold beneath the chandelier. Candles flickered against polished silverware. My father stood at the center of the room telling a story about Daniel's latest courtroom victory, while guests listened politely. Then his eyes found me again. That same disappointment. That same silent judgment. For one brief second I saw something else underneath it, though. Fear. It vanished almost immediately. But I caught it. I took my seat quietly at the far end of the table. Amanda sat beside me and squeezed my hand once under the tablecloth before letting go. Dinner continued. Conversation drifted around me like radio static. Stock markets, real estate, retirement communities in Florida. Nobody asked where I had been. Nobody asked why my hands shook slightly lifting my water glass. At one point, one of the guests smiled politely toward me. "So, Evelyn, are you stationed locally now?" "Mostly Virginia." Must be difficult for a woman. Before I could answer, my father cut in smoothly. "She's always had something to prove." There it was again. Not pride. Not concern. Dismissal disguised as observation. I stared down at my plate. Suddenly, I remembered being 17 years old, standing in our kitchen holding my West Point acceptance letter, while my mother cried tears of joy. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Why would you throw your life away like that?" he asked. I never forgot those words. Not during Beast Barracks. Not during airborne school. Not during my first deployment when mortar fire rattled the walls at 3 in the morning. And definitely not now. Because no matter how far I climbed, part of me was still that 17-year-old girl trying to prove she deserved respect. Then the television in the adjoining sitting room interrupted the dinner with a breaking news alert. The room quieted instantly. A news anchor appeared on screen looking unusually serious. Tonight, Pentagon officials confirmed the success of a classified hostage rescue operation involving American aid workers trapped overseas. My stomach tightened. Sources described the mission as one of the most dangerous extractions conducted this year. My father glanced toward the television with mild interest. Still completely unaware that while he spent the evening calling me an embarrassment, his daughter had been one of the soldiers standing inside that fire. And then the front doorbell rang. Once. Sharp. Heavy. Every conversation stopped. A moment later, the family butler hurried toward the foyer. Then I heard his suddenly nervous voice echo through the hallway. "Sir, there's a general here asking for Major Evelyn Carter." The entire house went still. Not quiet. Still. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until even breathing feels too loud. My father slowly lowered his wine glass onto the table. Amanda turned toward me immediately, eyes wide with confusion. Daniel frowned slightly, already calculating problems the way lawyers do when unexpected authority walks into a room. And me? I felt something cold settle deep in my stomach. Because generals do not show up at private homes at 9:30 at night unless something serious is happening. For one terrible second, I thought maybe we had lost another man after extraction. Maybe someone from my team died on the flight home. Maybe there had been new intelligence, new orders. The butler appeared in the dining room doorway, looking visibly rattled. "Sir," he repeated carefully, "General Holloway is requesting Major Carter immediately." My father blinked. A general. "Yes, sir." Every eye in the room turned toward me. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood despite the sharp pull in my injured shoulder. "I should take this," I said quietly. Nobody stopped me. The foyer lights glowed soft amber against polished marble floors as I walked toward the front entrance. Rain still hammered against the windows. Through the glass panels beside the door, I could see dark government SUVs lined along the curb. 2 uniformed officers stood beneath umbrellas outside. And there, waiting calmly in full-dress uniform beneath the chandelier light, stood General Raymond Holloway. 4 stars. Decorations across his chest. Sharp silver hair. Eyes that looked permanently exhausted from carrying the weight of too many wars. The second he saw me, his posture shifted. Not casually. Formally. "Major Carter." I straightened automatically despite the ache in every muscle. "Sir." Then, to my father's absolute shock, General Holloway saluted me first. The room behind me fell completely silent. I returned the salute immediately. "Easy, Major," he said gently after lowering his hand. "You've done enough for 1 week." I didn't know what to say to that. My father stepped carefully into the foyer behind me. "General, I'm Charles Carter." Holloway acknowledged him politely but briefly. "Mr. Carter." My father extended a hand. The general shook it once. Then his attention returned directly to me. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, Major, but Washington requested immediate transport." "Transport?" Not meeting. Not briefing. Transport. That meant this had gone far beyond internal military recognition. I kept my voice steady. "Sir, is this regarding Operation Lantern?" Several guests exchanged confused looks behind us. The general nodded once. "It's no longer classified." The words landed heavily in my chest. No longer classified. After 48 hours of silence, after signing non-disclosure orders before Wheels Up at Andrews, after carrying the entire mission locked inside my head while being humiliated at my father's dinner table, now the truth was finally breathing air. General Holloway glanced briefly around the room. "May I come inside?" "Of course," my father answered quickly, suddenly transformed into the gracious host again. The general stepped into the dining room while the two officers remained outside. Every guest stood instinctively now, tension crackling through the room. Nobody touched their food anymore. Nobody spoke. The television still murmured softly in the next room about the rescue mission overseas. General Holloway faced the room calmly. "I understand this is a private family gathering," he began, "but given the circumstances, I felt it important to personally acknowledge Major Carter's actions tonight." I saw Amanda's hand rise slowly toward her mouth. My father remained perfectly still. The general continued. 48 hours ago, a humanitarian convoy carrying American medical personnel and aid workers was ambushed near the Syrian border. 11 civilians, including 2 children, became trapped behind hostile lines after the convoy was destroyed. The room stayed silent except for the rain outside. I kept my eyes fixed forward. Not because I was disciplined, because I suddenly could not bear to look at my father. Major Carter led the extraction team responsible for recovering those civilians. Someone near the back whispered softly, "Oh my God." The general's voice remained measured, professional. The operation encountered heavy resistance. Multiple aircraft were damaged during extraction. Casualties were expected to exceed 70%. My shoulder throbbed harder now, almost in rhythm with the memory returning piece by piece. Smoke. Rotor blades. Marcus screaming for suppressive fire. The terrified little girl clutching my neck so tightly I could barely breathe. General Holloway looked directly at my father then. "Your daughter refused evacuation after sustaining injuries and re-entered an active combat zone to recover the final survivors." I heard Amanda cry softly beside the table. Dad looked at me finally. Really looked at me. Not at the dirt. Not at the blood. At me. The general stepped closer. 5 American civilians are alive tonight specifically because Major Carter ignored direct danger to herself. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. The room felt frozen in time. Then Holloway said the sentence that changed everything. "The Joint Chiefs personally requested Major Carter's presence at the Pentagon this evening before formal commendations are announced." One of my father's business associates actually sat down slowly like his legs stopped working. Daniel stared at me in disbelief. And my father? My father looked suddenly old. Not physically. Spiritually. Like something inside him had cracked open all at once. His eyes drifted toward the dark stain near my sleeve again. Only now he understood what he was looking at. Not mess. Not recklessness. Cost. General Holloway softened his tone slightly. "I've commanded soldiers for 32 years, Mr. Carter. Most people spend their lives hoping they'll be brave when the moment comes." He glanced toward me briefly. "Your daughter already proved she is." I swallowed hard. That almost broke me more than the insult earlier. Because strangers had spent my entire adult life seeing value in me more clearly than my own father ever could. The television anchor in the other room continued talking quietly about heroic military personnel involved in the extraction. Heroic. If only they knew how afraid we all were. There's a lie civilians believe about soldiers. They think courage means fear disappears. It doesn't. Courage is hearing your own heartbeat scream in your ears while moving forward anyway. Marcus knew that. God, Marcus. My chest tightened sharply. General Holloway noticed immediately. His voice lowered. "I'm sorry about Sergeant Green." The room blurred for half a second. I looked away. "Thank you, sir." Nobody downstairs understood the meaning of that sentence except me. Sergeant Marcus Green. Dead at 27. A man who carried pictures of his twin daughters folded inside his vest pocket. A man who laughed too loudly at bad jokes. A man who died buying us 30 extra seconds near the helicopter. 30 seconds that saved 11 civilians. And while his body cooled inside a transport aircraft, I was standing in my father's dining room being called an embarrassment. Something twisted violently inside my chest then. Not anger. Grief. The kind that arrives late because survival did not leave room for it earlier. General Holloway studied me carefully. "You should have been in medical already." "I'm all right, sir." That wasn't a suggestion, Major. A few people laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. Nobody succeeded. Then my father finally spoke. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it before. You were injured." I looked at him quietly. There were 1,000 things I could have said in that moment. Yes, Dad. Yes, while you were embarrassed by dirt on my uniform, I was bleeding through it. But suddenly I felt too tired for cruelty. Too tired for revenge. So I simply answered honestly, a little. His face collapsed almost invisibly after that. And for the first time in my life. My father looked ashamed of himself. General Holloway gave me 5 minutes. 5 minutes to collect whatever I needed before the convoy took me into D.C. 5 minutes to step out of my father's dining room after my entire life had been rearranged in front of witnesses. 5 minutes to stand between the girl who had always wanted his approval and the officer who had just been summoned by the highest military leadership in the country. It is strange how quickly a room can change its opinion of you. 10 minutes earlier I had been the uncomfortable daughter in the dirty uniform, the odd one, the woman who made polite dinner guests shift in their seats because my presence reminded them of things they preferred to respect from a distance. War, sacrifice, blood, the price of safety. Now everyone looked at me like I had become someone sacred. One woman actually touched my arm as I passed and whispered, "Thank you for your service," with tears shining in her eyes. My father's golf partner, the same man who had asked if I was still doing all that tactical stuff, stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. "Major," he said, voice rough, "I didn't realize." I nodded because I didn't trust myself to speak. That was the thing about admiration arriving late. It did not warm you the way people imagined it would. It landed cold, almost embarrassing, because the people offering it had not seen the parts that mattered. They had not seen Marcus pressing one hand to his own chest wound while waving me forward with the other. They had not seen the aid worker praying in Spanish under a burning axle. They had not seen me lying flat in the dirt, too scared to move for 3 whole seconds after a round snapped into the wall beside my face. They only saw the ending. America loves the ending. Heroes brought home, flags lowered and raised, a clean sentence on a news ticker. But none of it is clean when you are inside it. Amanda followed me into the hallway as I reached for my bag. "Evie," she whispered. I stopped. Her face had gone pale, all the careful hostess brightness gone from it. For once she looked exactly like my sister again, not the peacemaker, not the surgeon, not the woman trying to stitch our family together with shaking hands. "You should have told us," she said. "I couldn't." "I know, Her voice broke slightly. "You walked in here carrying all of that and we let him talk to you like that. You didn't let anything happen." "Yes, we did." That answer surprised me more than I expected. Amanda wiped beneath one eye quickly, almost angry at herself for crying. I keep telling myself Dad is just old-fashioned or scared or grieving Mom in some complicated way. I keep smoothing things over because it's easier than admitting he can be cruel. I looked toward the dining room where my father stood motionless near the table. Guests spoke in hushed voices around him, but he seemed unable to hear them. "He is scared," I said quietly. Amanda looked at me. "I saw it tonight." "That doesn't make it okay." "No," I said, "it doesn't." For years our family had treated my father's pain like a weather system. Something unavoidable. Something everyone else learned to dress around. If he was cold, we wore coats. If he thundered, we lowered our voices. If he withdrew, we pretended silence was dignity. But fear does not stop being damaging just because it was born from grief. I slung my bag over my good shoulder, then winced before I could hide it. Amanda saw. "Let me look at that." "There isn't time." "Evelyn." I almost smiled. She used my full name only when switching into doctor mode or older sister mode. Sometimes both. Before I could answer, Daniel appeared at the end of the hall. He looked uncomfortable, his expensive suit suddenly out of place in a house that no longer felt like a party. "I can drive you," he said. I stared at him. "What?" "To D.C. or the hospital, wherever, I can drive. There's a government convoy outside." "I know that." He loosened his tie and looked down at the floor. I just wanted to do something useful. For a moment, none of us spoke. Daniel had spent most of his life being impressive, which is not the same thing as being brave. He was not a bad man. That was the complicated part. He had simply learned early that silence kept him favored. Silence kept him safe. Silence made him the son our father could be proud of. Now standing in the hallway, he looked like he knew exactly what that silence had cost someone else. I should have said something, he admitted. Yes, I said. He flinched, but he didn't argue. I'm sorry. I studied him for a long second. His apology was not dramatic. It did not fix anything, but it was clean, honest, no excuses attached. So I nodded once. Thank you. Behind him, my father stepped slowly into view. He looked smaller beneath the hallway light. The navy blazer, the silver pocket square, the practiced authority, none of it worked anymore. His face had changed in a way I could not name, like he had opened a door in his mind and found a room he had been avoiding for decades. Evelyn, he said. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. Amanda and Daniel both seemed to understand this was not their moment. They moved back without being asked. My father took one step toward me, then stopped as if he no longer trusted himself to come closer. I didn't know. The words hung there. Small words. Dangerous words. Because part of me wanted to forgive him immediately just to end the discomfort. That was the child in me. The daughter trained by years of sharp dinners and colder breakfasts to protect his feelings before my own. But I was not 17 anymore. I was not standing in the kitchen with a West Point letter trembling in my hand. I was not waiting for him to decide whether my life had value. No, I said quietly, you didn't. His jaw worked once. If I had known, you would have been proud tonight. He looked at me, then wounded by the question. But I needed him to feel it. Would you have been proud because I saved people? I continued, my voice still calm. Or because someone important finally told you I was worth respecting? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That silence answered more than any confession could have. I looked toward the dining room at the guests who had gone quiet again, at the abandoned plates and melting candles and birthday cake no one had cut. Then I looked back at my father. I spent my whole life trying to make you proud, I said. I thought if I became strong enough, useful enough, decorated enough, you would finally see me. My voice almost caught, but I held it steady. Tonight I realized you were never looking. His eyes filled slowly. My father did not cry. Not when my mother died. Not at the funeral. Not when he stood beside her grave with his hands folded behind his back as if grief was something he could discipline into obedience. But now his eyes shone under the hallway light. Evelyn. I shook my head gently. I don't need you to be proud of me anymore. That sentence did not come out angry. It came out tired. And maybe that made it hurt worse. Outside, a car door opened. One of Holloway's officers waited beneath a black umbrella in the rain. I adjusted the strap on my bag. My father looked toward the doorway, panic crossing his face for one brief second. The kind of panic men feel when they realize an apology has not arrived in time to stop someone from leaving. Please, he said quietly, don't go like this. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I stepped closer and lowered my voice so only he could hear. Dad, I already left like this years ago. You're only noticing tonight. His face crumpled. I did not stay to watch the rest of it. General Holloway waited in the foyer, expression unreadable but kind. He had heard enough to understand, and enough discipline not to mention it. Ready, Major? No. Not even close. But I had been unready before. Yes, sir. As we stepped outside, rain struck my face cold and clean. The SUVs idled along the curb, red taillights glowing against the wet street. Behind me, through the open front door, I heard my father say my name once more. This time he did not sound disappointed. He sounded afraid. I climbed into the back seat anyway. Because some daughters spend their whole lives waiting to be chosen. And some finally learn to choose themselves. Washington looked different after midnight. Cleaner somehow. The monuments glowed pale against the dark sky while rainwater shimmered across empty streets like liquid glass. From the back seat of the SUV, I watched the Capitol dome blur past through exhausted eyes, my reflection faint in the window beside it. I looked terrible. My hair half fallen from its bun, bruises darkening beneath my collar, fatigue carved into every line of my face. And for the first time in years, I stopped trying to hide it. General Holloway sat across from me in silence for most of the drive. Not uncomfortable silence. Soldier silence. The kind that understands some thoughts need room to breathe before words touch them. Eventually, he handed me a folded cloth napkin from the console. I frowned slightly. Sir, you still have blood near your jaw. I touched my face instinctively and found dried residue near my chin I had missed earlier. Probably Marcus's, maybe mine. Hard to know anymore. Sorry. Don't apologize for surviving. That sentence settled heavily in the car. I cleaned my face quietly while city lights slid across the windows. After a moment, Holloway spoke again. Sergeant Green's family has been notified. I stared down at the stained napkin in my hands. How did they take it? The way families always take it. I nodded once. There is no good way to hear your child is never coming home. No speech softens it. No folded flag repairs it. Marcus's daughters would grow up with photographs and stories and medals in a shadow box. They would hear words like hero and sacrifice from people who never met him. Someday they would ask whether he was scared before he died. And someone would probably lie to them. I hoped they wouldn't. Because Marcus had been terrified. So was I. So were all of us. That did not make him less brave. It made him human. The SUV turned beneath the guarded entrance of the Pentagon parking structure. Security lights washed over concrete walls as barriers lifted ahead of us. I leaned my head briefly against the cool window. 48 hours earlier, I had been sprinting through gunfire. Now I was arriving at the center of American military power with dirt still trapped beneath my fingernails. Life can pivot violently before the heart has time to catch up. Inside the building felt strangely quiet at that hour. Endless corridors, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of coffee and polished floors. Staff officers moved quickly past us, carrying folders and tablets, speaking in low, urgent voices. Nobody stared at me. That was another thing civilians never fully understood about the military. Real respect rarely looks dramatic. The people inside those halls recognized exhaustion instantly. They saw the wrinkled uniform, the sleepless eyes, the stiffness in my left arm. And they understood exactly what it meant. As we walked, Holloway slowed slightly beside me. "You should know something before we enter," he said. I glanced at him. The president was briefed personally on Lantern. I exhaled slowly. Not because I felt important. Because suddenly the mission became even more real. Governments talk about operations in numbers. Assets recovered, threats neutralized, strategic outcomes. But I still remembered the sound of a little girl crying for her mother in the dark. That was the real mission. Not headlines. People. We entered a secured conference room where several senior officers already waited. Some I recognized immediately. Others only from television briefings and official photographs. The chairman himself stood near the far end of the table. Every instinct inside me straightened automatically despite my exhaustion. "Major Carter," he said warmly. "Sir." He walked toward me and extended his hand. No ceremony. No cameras. Just genuine respect. "You brought Americans home," he said simply. Something inside my chest tightened painfully. Because Marcus didn't come home. I shook the thought away before grief could swallow me in front of the room. The chairman gestured toward a chair. "Sit before you fall over." A few people smiled softly. I obeyed. Coffee appeared near my elbow almost immediately. Someone else handed me medical paperwork. Another officer quietly informed me a surgical team was waiting once debrief concluded. The efficiency of it all almost made me emotional. Not because it was glamorous. Because after years of feeling emotionally invisible inside my own family, it was overwhelming to sit in a room where competence was noticed without needing explanation. For nearly 2 hours we reviewed the operation. Satellite timelines. Extraction details. Enemy movement. Civilian recovery conditions. I answered questions automatically, though exhaustion blurred parts of the edges. Several times I caught officers studying me carefully when discussing the final helicopter run. One colonel finally asked quietly, "Major, why did you go back?" The room stayed silent. I looked down at my hands. Because someone had to. Because leaving civilians behind would haunt me forever. Because Marcus bought us 30 seconds with his life and I refused to waste them. Instead, I answered honestly. There was still a child inside. Nobody spoke after that. Around 3:30 in the morning, the chairman closed the final folder. "You understand formal recognition will become public within 48 hours. "Yes, sir. You'll likely receive media requests afterward." The thought made me tired all over again. I'd rather avoid publicity if possible. A faint smile crossed his face. Unfortunately, heroes rarely control that part. Heroes. I still hated that word. Not because I rejected honor. Because war taught me how random survival really is. Then the chairman studied me more carefully. General Holloway informed us there was an unfortunate incident at your family gathering tonight. I stiffened slightly. It's personal, sir. Yes, he said gently, but I suspect many soldiers would understand it. That surprised me. He folded his hands together. Major, one of the hardest things about service is accepting that the people we love often cannot follow us where we've been. Sometimes they respond with pride, sometimes fear, sometimes denial. His eyes held mine steadily. Do not confuse someone's inability to understand your sacrifice with proof it had no value. I looked away quickly after that because emotion finally rose sharp behind my ribs. Not from the commendations. Not from the Pentagon. From kindness. Simple human kindness after years of emotional distance. Around dawn, I finally stepped outside the building. The rain had stopped. Cool morning air drifted across the empty courtyard, while the first gray light touched Washington's skyline. For a moment, everything felt strangely still. Then my phone vibrated. Dad. I stared at the screen. One missed call. Then another. Then a voicemail notification. I should have ignored it. Instead, I pressed play. For several seconds, there was only breathing. Then my father's voice came through rough and unsteady in a way I had never heard before. Evelyn? I don't know if you'll listen to this. Silence. I kept thinking about when you were little and used to run into thunderstorms because they excited you. A broken laugh escaped him softly. Your mother used to say you were born without fear. His voice cracked slightly. I think I spent so many years being terrified something would happen to you, that I convinced myself resenting your choices hurt less than being proud of them. I closed my eyes. Cars moved faintly somewhere beyond the gates. Birds stirred in nearby trees. And for the first time in decades, my father sounded honest. I was wrong, he whispered. God, Evelyn, I was so wrong. My throat tightened painfully. Then came the sentence that finally broke whatever anger I still carried. I should have seen you sooner. I lowered the phone slowly. The sunrise spread gold across the horizon beyond the Pentagon walls. And standing there in the quiet morning light, bruised and exhausted and grieving men who would never see another sunrise themselves, I finally understood something. My father's approval had shaped me, but surviving without it had forged me. A week later, he stood in my driveway before I left for Walter Reed physical therapy. No audience. No birthday guests. No polished speeches. Just an old man holding 2 coffees with trembling hands. When I stepped outside, he looked at my uniform for a long moment. Not the dirt. Not the scars. Me. Then slowly my father stood straighter and gave me the first salute of my life. And this time, I did not need it. But I accepted it anyway. If this story touched you, I'd love to know where you're watching from, and what part stayed with you most. Sometimes the deepest wounds in life don't come from strangers, they come from the people whose approval we spend years chasing. And sometimes, healing begins the moment we realize our worth existed long before they recognized it. Share your thoughts below, and if you enjoy emotional stories about family sacrifice and second chances. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. We've got many more powerful stories ahead.